He whispered to his mistress in the back of the courtroom. "Don't worry, babe. She's just a housewife. I'll leave her with nothing but the clothes on her back." Arthur Vance thought he was the smartest man in the room. He thought his wife Annie was weak, clueless, and dependent on his paycheck. He was wrong. Dead wrong. In the next hour, a single document would reveal a secret fortune so vast it would turn the hunter into the prey. This is the story of a man who boasted about replacing his wife, only to find out she was the one who owned the very chair he sat in. You are not going to believe how hard the karma hits in this one. The early afternoon sun glinted off the rims of the crystal flutes at Le Bernardin, one of New York City's most exclusive seafood restaurants. Arthur Vance, a man who wore his arrogance like a second skin, swirled the vintage Dom Perignon, watching the bubbles rise. He checked his Rolex Submariner for the third time in 10 minutes. "Relax, Artie." Chloe DeWitt purred, reaching across the pristine white tablecloth to stroke the back of his hand. Her nails were freshly manicured in a sharp, blood-red stiletto shape, a look she knew Arthur loved because it looked dangerous. "It's just a formality. By 4:00 p.m. you'll be a free man, and we can finally stop hiding." Arthur smirked, leaning back in the leather booth. He was 45, handsome, in a rugged way, but his eyes held a coldness that had only grown over the years. As the regional VP of Vanguard Logistics, he was used to crushing competitors and negotiating hard deals. He viewed his marriage to Annie in the same way a contract that had expired. "I'm not worried, Chloe." Arthur scoffed loud enough for the waiter to hear as he refilled their glasses. "I'm just impatient. Annie has been dragging her feet for months. The woman can't even decide what to make for dinner, let alone navigate a high-stakes divorce. She's probably terrified." Chloe giggled a sound that lacked genuine warmth. "Well, she should be. You're taking the penthouse, right? The penthouse, the portfolio, the Aston Martin." Arthur listed them off like grocery items. "I've got a forensic accountant who made sure my official income looks modest for the last 2 years. Annie thinks I'm on a base salary. She has no idea about the offshore bonuses or the shell company in the Caymans." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, though his ego made him project it. "I told her, Chloe. I looked her right in the eye last night and said, 'Annie, you're a sweet girl, but you're simple. You wouldn't know what to do with money if you had it. I'm doing you a favor by managing the separation.'" "And what did she say?" Chloe asked, her eyes gleaming with greed. "Nothing." Arthur laughed, taking a large gulp of champagne. "She just sat there in that raggedy armchair, knitting or reading or whatever boring thing she does, and nodded. She's beaten Chloe. She knows I'm out of her league. I'm trading up, and she knows it." Arthur looked at Chloe, 26, vibrant and entirely focused on his wallet. It was exactly what he wanted. A trophy. Annie, with her quiet demeanor, her charity work, and her refusal to attend his flashy corporate galas, had become a bore. She was a relic of his past, back when he was a nobody trying to climb the ladder. Now that he was at the top, he wanted someone who looked the part. "Let's toast," Arthur raised his glass, "to the end of the dead weight, and to the beginning of the Vance Empire with the queen I actually deserve." They clinked glasses, the sound ringing out like a bell. Across town, in a modest waiting room, Annie Vance sat with her hands folded in her lap. She wore a simple navy dress that Arthur had once called Dauden. She wore no jewelry other than a small silver locket. Her lawyer, a sharp-featured man named Ivan Sterling, walked in. He didn't look like the flashy sharks Arthur hired. He looked like a university professor, tweed jacket, calm demeanor, wire-rimmed glasses. "Are you ready, Annie?" Ivan asked softly. Annie looked up. Her eyes were not red from crying. They were clear. They were dry. They were the eyes of a woman who had done her grieving years ago, the day she realized her husband loved his reflection more than he loved her. "I'm ready, Ivan," she said, her voice steady. "Did he file the financial affidavit?" "He did." Ivan nodded, a small, tight smile playing on his lips. "It's exactly as we predicted. He's claiming poverty relative to his lifestyle. He's hidden the Cayman accounts. He's hidden the crypto wallet." Annie stood up, smoothing her dress. "Good. Let him think he's smarter than everyone else. It makes the fall so much harder." "He has no idea, does he?" Ivan asked, holding the door open for her. "Arthur never looks at the fine print, Ivan," Annie said, stepping out into the hallway. "He only looks at the headlines, and today he's going to learn that I own the printing press." The atmosphere in Superior Courtroom 304 was sterile and cold. The fluorescent lights hummed with a low-frequency buzz that usually induced anxiety in defendants. Arthur Vance, however, strolled in like he was walking onto a yacht. He was flanked by his attorney, Julian Blackwood, a man known in New York legal circles as the Butcher. Blackwood cost $800 an hour and wore suits that cost more than most people's cars. On the other side of the aisle, Annie sat quietly next to Ivan. She didn't look at Arthur. She didn't look at the gallery where Chloe was sitting brazenly chewing gum and scrolling on her phone. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Harrison Thorne entered. He was an older man known for his no-nonsense attitude and his intolerance for theatrics. He adjusted his spectacles and looked down at the docket. "Case number 2944, Vance v. Vance," Judge Thorne read. "We are here for the preliminary hearing regarding asset division and spousal support. Mr. Blackwood, you may proceed." Julian Blackwood stood up, buttoning his jacket with a flourish. "Your Honor, this is a simple case. My client, Mr. Arthur Vance, has been the sole provider for this family for 15 years. Mrs. Vance has not worked a day in that time. While my client is generous, the demands Mrs. Vance is making are frankly extortionate. We are proposing a one-time settlement of $50,000. And she keeps the 2018 Honda. Mr. Vance will retain the marital home, the investments, and his business interests, as he is the sole generator of that value." Arthur leaned back, crossing his arms. He shot a glance at Annie. "Take the 50 grand and run, honey," he thought. "It's more than you're worth." Judge Thorne turned his gaze to the defense table. "Mr. Sterling." Ivan stood up slowly. He didn't have the swagger of Blackwood. He held a single manila folder. "Your Honor." Ivan began, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. "We are not contesting the divorce. My client wants out of this marriage just as much as Mr. Vance does. However, we strongly contest the framing of the financial reality." "Objection," Blackwood barked, barely standing up. "Relevance. The financial affidavits are filed. Mr. Vance earns a salary of $250,000. The rest is market speculation." "If I may," Ivan continued, ignoring the interruption. "Mr. Vance is under the impression that he is the primary breadwinner. He is also under the impression that the assets in question belong to him." Arthur chuckled audibly. The judge banged his gavel. "Mr. Vance, silence." "Sorry, Your Honor," Arthur said, smirking. It's absurd. I pay the mortgage. I pay the bills. She buys yarn." "Mr. Sterling, get to the point," Judge Thorne said, looking impatient. "The point, Your Honor," Ivan said, opening the folder, "is that Mr. Vance has committed perjury on his financial affidavit. He failed to list the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, holding approximately $4.2 million. The room went silent. Arthur froze. He grabbed Blackwood's arm. "How does he know about that?" he hissed. Blackwood looked rattled. "Speculation, Your Honor, proof. We have the bank transfers," Ivan said calmly, handing a stack of papers to the bailiff to pass to the judge. "But that is actually the least of Mr. Vance's problems." "The least?" Judge Thorne raised an eyebrow, flipping through the documents. "Yes," Ivan said. "Mr. Vance claims he wishes to retain his business interests, specifically his position and stock options at Vanguard Logistics. He claims he built the company." "I did," Arthur shouted, standing up. "I took that company from a regional shipper to a national powerhouse." "Sit down, Mr. Vance," the judge roared. Ivan waited for the echo to die down. He turned to look directly at Arthur for the first time. "Mr. Vance, do you know who the majority shareholder of Vanguard Logistics is, the entity listed as Archangel Holdings?" Arthur sneered. "Some investment group in Switzerland. I report to the board. They love me. What does this have to do with Annie?" Ivan turned to Annie. She finally looked up, locking eyes with her husband. Her expression wasn't angry. It was pitying. "Your Honor," Ivan said, "Archangel Holdings is not an investment group. It is a sole proprietorship." He pulled a final document from the folder. "Archangel Holdings is the private investment vehicle of Mrs. Annie Vance." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "What?" Arthur whispered. The word fell out of his mouth like a stone. "Mrs. Vance comes from the Sterling mining family," Ivan explained to the stunned courtroom. "She inherited her fortune at 22. She wanted to marry for love, not money, so she kept her assets in a blind trust. When Mr. Vance was struggling to get promoted 10 years ago, Mrs. Vance instructed the trust to buy a controlling stake in Vanguard Logistics and recommend his promotion." Arthur's face went pale grey. He looked at the judge, then at his lawyer, then at Chloe. Chloe had stopped chewing her gum. Her phone was in her lap. She was staring at Annie with wide, terrified eyes. "You," Arthur stammered, pointing a shaking finger at his wife. "You own the company. I own 62% of it, Arthur." Annie spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft, but it cut through him like a knife. "I hired you. I promoted you. And for the last 3 years I've been approving your bonuses, hoping you'd eventually feel secure enough to stop cheating on me. But you didn't." "This is a lie," Arthur gasped, looking at Blackwood. "Fix this." Blackwood was frantically reading the document Ivan had slid across the table. "It looks authentic, Arthur. It's a notarized deed of trust." "And," Ivan added, delivering the final blow for the opening round, "since Mr. Vance has just admitted to using company funds, my client's funds, to facilitate an extramarital affair and hide assets, we are countersuing not just for divorce, but for embezzlement and breach of fiduciary duty." Arthur Vance slumped into his chair. The winner of the morning was suddenly staring down the barrel of a loaded cannon. The court recessed for lunch, but nobody in Arthur's camp was eating. They were huddled in a conference room down the hall, the air thick with panic and the smell of stale coffee. Arthur was pacing his tie, loosened sweat beading on his forehead. "She can't own it. She knits for God's sake. She watches cooking shows. How can she own a multi-million-dollar logistics firm?" "It's called a silent partner for a reason, Arthur." Julian Blackwood snapped, losing his cool. And you just walked into a buzzsaw. Why didn't you tell me she was a sterling? That family is old money. Real money. I didn't know, Arthur screamed. She told me her parents were farmers. Gentlemen farmers, Julian corrected, rubbing his temples. They owned half of Montana, you idiot. In the corner, Chloe was frantically typing on her phone. What are you doing? Arthur snapped at her. Get off Instagram. Chloe looked up, her face hard. The babe persona was evaporating rapidly. I'm checking the stock price of Vanguard. It's dropping. News of the lawsuit leaked. Who leaked it? Arthur demanded. Probably her lawyer, Julian said. It's a pressure tactic, and it's working. The board is going to call you any minute. The board loves me, Arthur insisted, though his voice wavered. The board works for her, Julian reminded him brutally. Arthur, listen to me. We need to settle, immediately. You need to go in there, apologize, and beg for a settlement that keeps you out of jail for the embezzlement. Embezzlement? Arthur laughed nervously. It was just creative accounting. Everyone does it. Using company funds to buy a ring for your mistress isn't creative accounting, it's theft. Julian slammed his hand on the table. And if she presses charges, you're looking at 5 to 10 years. And Chloe, Julian turned to the mistress, you're an accessory. You accepted gifts knowing they were bought with misappropriated funds. Chloe stood up, grabbing her Chanel bag. Whoa, hold on. I didn't know anything. Arthur told me he was rich. He told me it was his money. Arthur stared at her. Chloe. We're in this together. Chloe let out a sharp, cruel laugh. Together, Arthur, look at you. You're a middle-aged manager who's about to get fired by his wife. I'm 26. I have a modeling career to think about. I can't be dragged into an embezzlement scandal. You said you loved me, Arthur said, his voice small. I loved the lifestyle, Chloe corrected, moving towards the door. And it looks like the lifestyle just got repossessed. Where are you going? Arthur stepped toward her. To the bathroom, Chloe lied. I need to fix my makeup before we go back in. She walked out the door, clicking shut behind her. Arthur sank into a chair, putting his head in his hands. She's coming back, right? Julian didn't answer. He was too busy reading the fine print of the document Annie's lawyer had provided. Arthur, did you sign a non-compete clause when you took the VP role? I don't know, maybe I sign 100 things a day. Well, Julian said, his face grim. You signed one, and it says if you are terminated for cause, like say stealing money to fund an affair, you are barred from working in the logistics industry in North America for 5 years. Arthur felt the room spin. His career, his reputation, his girl. It was all dissolving like sugar in hot water. Meanwhile, in the courthouse cafeteria, Annie sat with Ivan calmly eating a yogurt. He's going to come begging, Ivan said. I know, Annie replied. What do you want to do? Annie set her spoon down. He humiliated me, Ivan, for years. He made me feel small so he could feel big. He introduced that woman to our friends as his assistant and laughed about it behind my back. He spent our anniversary in Cabo with her, while I sat at home waiting for a phone call. She looked out the window at the city skyline. I don't want his money. I have plenty. I don't want an apology, because it won't be real. Then what do you want? Ivan asked. Annie's eyes hardened. I want the truth. I want him to stand on that stand under oath and admit exactly what he is, and then I want to fire him. Publicly. Ivan smiled. Then finish your yogurt, Mrs. Vance. We have a show to put on. Just then, Ivan's phone buzzed. He looked at the text message and raised an eyebrow. What is it? Annie asked. It's a message from Chloe DeWitt, Ivan said, turning the phone so Annie could see. The message read, I have recordings of Arthur talking about hiding the money. What are they worth to you? Annie stared at the screen. A slow, icy smile spread across her face. Tell her to come to the conference room, Annie said. Let's see how loyal Arthur's true love really is. The conference room smelled of lemon polish and nervous sweat. Annie sat at the head of the mahogany table, her posture perfect, hands clasped over the files that held the destruction of her marriage. Ivan Sterling stood by the window watching the door. When it opened, Chloe DeWitt didn't sashay in. She slunk in. The bravado from the restaurant was gone, replaced by the frantic energy of a trapped animal. She clutched her phone like a lifeline. Sit, Annie said. It wasn't a suggestion. Chloe sat. She looked at Annie, really looked at her for the first time. She didn't see the dowdy housewife Arthur had described. She saw a woman radiating the kind of power that doesn't need to raise its voice. Arthur says you're bluffing. Chloe started, her voice shaky. He says you can't prove the embezzlement without implicating yourself since you own the company. Annie smiled, a cold, wintry expression. Arthur thinks checkers is a strategy game. I'm playing chess. I didn't authorize those specific transfers. My signature was forged on the approval override. That makes it a felony for him and theft for anyone who received the proceeds. Annie leaned forward. That diamond tennis bracelet on your wrist. The lease on your apartment in Soho. The Cayman trips. That's stolen property, Chloe. Grand larceny. Ivan has the police on speed dial. You could be in a cell by dinner. Chloe's hand flew to her bracelet, her eyes widening. I didn't know. He told me it was his bonus. Ignorance isn't a defense when the numbers are this big, Ivan interjected smoothly. However, Annie softened her tone just a fraction. I'm not interested in destroying a 26-year-old girl who was foolish enough to believe a liar. I want Arthur. Total, absolute capitulation. You said you had recordings. Chloe swallowed hard. She tapped her phone screen, her fingers trembling. He likes to brag. When he drinks, he talks about how he moves the money. He talks about you. Play it, Annie commanded. Chloe pressed play. The tinny sound of Arthur's voice filled the room, accompanied by the clinking of glass and background jazz. She's a patsy, babe. A total patsy. I've got 3 million sitting in a shell corp called Blue Horizon. I skimmed it off the logistics shipping contracts. Annie's family money covers the overhead, so nobody notices the profit margins are lower than they should be. I'm literally robbing her blind, and she's knitting me a sweater. Laughter followed. Arthur's laugh, and then Chloe's giggle. Chloe winced at the sound of her own voice. I have dates, times, and the account numbers for Blue Horizon. He wrote them down for me in case anything happened to him. Annie's face remained impassive, though Ivan saw her knuckles turn white. Here is the deal, Annie said. You transfer those files to Ivan right now. You agree to testify that Arthur told you the money was illicit. In exchange, Vanguard Logistics will not pursue you for the return of the gifts or the rent payments. You walk away clean. But you walk away today. You disappear from his life. Done, Chloe said instantly. She didn't even hesitate. She airdropped the files to Ivan's tablet. One more thing, Annie said, as Chloe stood to leave. Why? Why turn on him so fast? Chloe paused at the door, looking back with a mix of shame and bitterness. Because when the judge mentioned prison, Arthur looked at me. He wasn't looking at me like a lover, Annie. He was looking at me like a scapegoat. He would have thrown me under the bus to save his own skin. You might be the wife he cheated on, but at least he respected your money. He didn't respect me at all. Chloe walked out. Annie let out a breath she had been holding. Do we have enough? Ivan tapped his tablet, reviewing the new evidence. Annie, with this audio and the ledger numbers. We don't just have enough for the divorce. We have enough to bury him. The afternoon session of Vance v. Vance began with a palpable tension. The gallery was fuller now. Word had spread through the courthouse that something big was happening in Judge Thorne's courtroom. Even the clerks were whispering. Arthur sat at the defense table looking disheveled. He kept checking the door, waiting for Chloe. She hadn't returned. Mr. Blackwood, call your witness, Judge Thorne ordered. The defense calls Arthur Vance, Julian Blackwood said, though he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Arthur took the stand. He adjusted his tie, trying to regain his composure. He was a salesman after all. He could sell anything, even his own innocence. Mr. Vance, Blackwood began. Could you explain the discrepancy in the financial affidavit regarding the offshore accounts? Absolutely. Arthur said, his voice smooth, practicing the lie he had concocted during lunch. It was an administrative error. Blue Horizon is a slush fund for emergency company logistics bribes for customs at international ports, that sort of thing. It's standard industry practice. It's not my money. It belongs to Vanguard. I didn't list it as a personal asset because it isn't one. It was a clever lie. It admitted to a grey area business practice to cover up personal theft. And your relationship with Ms. DeWitt? Blackwood asked, trying to get ahead of the story. A lapse in judgment, Arthur said, hanging his head with practiced remorse. I was stressed. I was carrying the weight of the company on my back while my wife, well, she wasn't involved. I sought comfort. It was wrong, but it has no bearing on the financial division of assets. Thank you, Mr. Vance. Blackwood sat down. Mr. Sterling. The judge nodded to Annie's lawyer. Ivan approached the stand. He didn't hold any papers. He just looked at Arthur. Mr. Vance, you claim Blue Horizon is a corporate contingency fund. That is correct. And you claim you are the sole decision-maker for Vanguard's finances. I am the VP of Operations. Yes. Mr. Vance, are you aware that perjury is a felony? Arthur scoffed. I'm telling the truth. Your Honor. Ivan turned to the bench. We would like to introduce Exhibit D, a digital audio file provided by a witness, Ms. Chloe DeWitt, recorded 3 weeks ago at the St. Regis Bar. Arthur's eyes bulged. He stood up halfway. Objection. That's private. Overruled, Judge Thorne said, leaning in. Play it. The audio played over the courtroom speakers. It was loud, clear, or undeniable. I'm skimming it, robbing her blind, knitting me a sweater. The silence that followed was absolute. The court reporter stopped typing, her mouth slightly open. Ivan let the silence hang for 10 seconds. Mr. Vance, in that recording you explicitly state the money is skimmed and that you are robbing the owner. Did you or did you not use 45,000 of those funds to purchase a Porsche Macan for Ms. DeWitt on October 12th? Arthur looked at the jury box, which was empty, as this was a bench hearing, then at the judge, then at his lawyer. Blackwood had his face buried in his hands. Arthur croaked. And, Ivan continued relentlessly, are you aware that the owner you were robbing blind is the woman sitting right there, the woman who signed your paychecks? She tricked me. Arthur shouted his facade, cracking completely. He pointed a trembling finger at Annie. She trapped me. She knew she watched me do it and didn't stop me. That's entrapment. Judge Thorne slammed his gavel so hard the sound echoed like a gunshot. "Mr. Vance, you will control yourself." The judge glared at Arthur over his spectacles. "You are admitting to embezzlement in my courtroom to justify your adultery. Is that your defense strategy?" Arthur slumped back, defeated. "No, Your Honor." "I have heard enough," Judge Thorne said, closing the file. "The financial dishonesty here is staggering, but the fraud against the marital estate is even worse." The judge turned to the court reporter. "Let the record show that the prenuptial agreement is voided due to fraudulent non-disclosure by Mr. Vance. I am freezing all assets associated with Mr. Vance, including his personal accounts, pending a criminal investigation into the embezzlement of Vanguard Logistics." Arthur looked at Annie. She was looking right at him. She didn't look triumphant. She looked relieved. "Mr. Sterling," the judge asked, "does your client wish to say anything before I issue the final dissolution?" "Yes, Your Honor," Ivan said. "Mrs. Vance has one final piece of business to conduct regarding Mr. Vance's employment." The morning sun hit the glass facade of the Vanguard Logistics Tower, casting a long, sharp shadow over downtown Manhattan. For Arthur Vance, this building was more than just a workplace. It was his cathedral. It was the physical manifestation of his ego. He adjusted his silk tie in the rearview mirror of the rental car, a Ford Taurus that smelled faintly of stale cigarettes. His Aston Martin had been seized the previous afternoon, towed away from the courthouse curb, while he shouted at the impound officer. He pushed that memory down, burying it under layers of delusional confidence. "It's just a setback," Arthur muttered to his reflection. His eyes were bloodshot from a sleepless night spent in a cheap hotel near the airport, but he bared his teeth in a practiced smile. "The board needs me. Annie might own the shares, but I own the operations. Without me, ships don't move. Cargo doesn't clear. I am Vanguard." He stepped out of the car, smoothing the wrinkles of his suit. He had convinced himself that yesterday's courtroom disaster could be spun. He would tell the board that Annie was mentally unstable, that the embezzlement was a misunderstanding, a complex tax strategy she didn't comprehend. He would gaslight an entire corporation if he had to. Arthur walked through the revolving doors with the stride of a king returning from war. He expected the usual reception, the hush of reverence, the nod from the front desk, the nervous energy of junior analysts scrambling out of his way. Instead, the lobby fell silent. It wasn't a respectful silence. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a room full of people watching a car crash. Two receptionists stopped typing. A courier paused mid-step. Dozens of eyes fixed on him. Arthur ignored them. He marched toward the security turnstiles, pulling his platinum access badge from his pocket. He tapped it against the reader, ready to breeze through to the private elevator bank. Beep, beep, beep. A harsh red light flashed, access denied. Arthur frowned, tapping it again. Harder. Beep, beep, beep. Access denied. "Damn technology," Arthur hissed. He looked over the barrier at the security station. "Miller. The system is glitching again. Buzz me through." Officer Miller. A man Arthur had ignored for 5 years. Never learning his first name, never asking about his kids. Slowly stood up behind the marble console. He didn't reach for the release button. He crossed his massive arms over his chest. "I can't do that, Mr. Vance," Miller said, his voice deep and carrying across the silent lobby. "Excuse me," Arthur laughed, a sharp, incredulous bark. Do you know who I am? Miller? I'm the Vice President of Operations. If I'm not upstairs in 5 minutes, we lose contracts in Singapore. Open the gate. My instructions are clear, sir. Miller replied, his face impassive. Your credentials have been revoked. You are not permitted on the premises. Arthur felt a vain throb in his temple. The audience in the lobby was growing. He could see phones coming out. People were recording. Instructions from who? Arthur shouted, slamming his hand on the metal turnstile. I run this security team. I sign your paychecks. Actually, you don't. The voice didn't come from Miller. It came from the mezzanine level, drifting down like a verdict from on high. Arthur looked up. The glass railing of the second floor was lined with people. Standing front and center was Annie Vance. She looked transformed. The woman who had worn oversized cardigans and comfortable shoes was gone. In her place stood a titan. She wore a crisp, white, tailored suit that made her glow against the dark corporate interior. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. Next to her stood Silas Thorne, the chairman of the board, and Victoria Graves, the chief financial officer. Annie. Arthur's voice wavered, losing its boom. What is this? Is this another one of your little games? Annie didn't shout. She didn't need to. She walked to the top of the grand staircase, her heels clicking rhythmically on the marble. It's not a game, Arthur. It's a shareholder intervention. You can't ban me from my own building. Arthur yelled, trying to regain control of the narrative for the sake of the onlookers. I built this company. I took Vanguard from a regional shipper to a global powerhouse. You think you can run this? You knit scarves, Annie. You don't know the difference between a container ship and a canoe. He vaulted over the turnstile. A gasp went through the crowd. It was a desperate, undignified move, his expensive shoes scrabbling for traction. Mr. Vance, stop! Miller stepped forward, hand on his taser. Let him come up, Annie said calmly. Let him see. Miller hesitated, then stepped back. Arthur straightened his jacket, breathing hard, his face flushed a mottled red. He pointed a finger at Miller. You're fired. You hear me? Done. He stormed toward the elevators, pressing the button for the penthouse boardroom. The ride up was excruciating. He stood alone in the mirrored box, staring at his reflection. She's bluffing, he told himself. The board loves me. Silas Thorne and I play golf every Sunday. He won't let her destroy the stock price by firing the golden goose. The doors opened on the 40th floor. The executive suite was usually a hive of activity. Today it was still. The secretaries were at their desks, but no phones were ringing. As Arthur stormed down the hallway, he saw Beatrice, his executive assistant. Beatrice was a woman he had made cry at least once a week for 3 years. He had mocked her weight, her clothes, and her stutter. Beatrice, Arthur barked, get me the Singapore files and a double espresso, now! Beatrice looked up. She didn't flinch. She didn't scramble. She adjusted her glasses and looked him dead in the eye. No. Arthur stopped in his tracks. Excuse me. I don't work for you anymore, Arthur, Beatrice said, savoring the name. Not Mr. Vance, just Arthur. I work for the office of the chairwoman. Arthur snarled and pushed past her desk, throwing open the double doors to the boardroom. They were all there. The 12 members of the board of directors. The people Arthur had spent a decade charming, bribing with dinners, and impressing with inflated quarterly reports. But Annie was at the head of the table, his seat. "You're late, Arthur," Silas Thorne said coldly. Silas didn't look like his golf buddy today. He looked like a shark smelling blood. "Silas, thank God." Arthur walked in, spreading his hands. "You have to put a stop to this insanity. My wife is having a breakdown. She's interpreting a standard slush fund as embezzlement. You know how the industry works. We need that liquidity for bribes in Panama. Tell her." Silas didn't smile. He slid a thick document across the mahogany table. "We've been reviewing the Blue Horizon accounts since the court revelation yesterday, Arthur. It wasn't used for bribes in Panama. It was used for Cartier bracelets in Manhattan. It was used for a villa rental in Tuscany for you and Miss DeWitt. It was used to pay off your gambling debts in Vegas. Creative accounting," Arthur insisted, sweat beading on his forehead. "I was going to pay it back. It was a loan. It was theft." Victoria Graves, the CFO, cut in. "And under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, it exposes the entire board to liability if we don't act. You haven't just stolen from Annie. You've endangered us all." Arthur looked around the room. He saw no allies, only executioners. "So what?" Arthur sneered, dropping the nice guy act. "You're going to fire me, go ahead. The stock will tank, the shareholders will revolt. I am the face of this company." "Actually," Annie spoke up, her voice cutting through the tension like a razor, "the stock is up 4% this morning." Arthur froze. "What?" "We issued a press release at 8:00 a.m., Annie explained, tapping the screen of her tablet, "announcing a restructuring of leadership to focus on transparency and ethical governance. The market loves it. They were tired of your volatility, Arthur. They were tired of the lawsuits. It turns out you weren't the golden goose. You were the liability." She stood up. The movement was graceful, authoritative. She walked around the table until she stood directly in front of him. "We voted 20 minutes ago," Annie said. "The motion passed unanimously. You are terminated effective immediately for cause. That means no severance, no golden parachute, no stock options. Your vested shares are being clawed back to cover the embezzled funds." "You can't take my stock," Arthur whispered, the reality finally piercing his armor. "That's millions." "Read your contract, Arthur," Annie said. "The one you signed without reading, because you were too busy staring at the intern. Clause 14B, gross misconduct and criminal activity, results in total forfeiture of equity. You leave with nothing." Arthur felt the room spinning. He looked at the window, the view of the city. He thought he conquered. It felt like the glass was closing in. "Annie," he choked out his voice, small, pathetic. "Please. I have nothing else. The court froze my bank accounts. The house is gone. If you take this job, I'm destitute." He reached out to touch her arm. "Don't," Silas Thorne barked. 2 large security guards stepped out from the shadows of the room. Annie didn't flinch. She looked at his hand, the hand that had slipped a ring onto her finger 15 years ago, and then slipped it off to touch countless other women. "You're not destitute, Arthur," Annie said softly, but the softness was the kind that precedes a killing frost. "You have your freedom. For now. Until the indictment comes down next week. I suggest you use this time to find a public defender. I hear they're very budget-friendly." She pulled a white envelope from the table and held it out. "What is this?" Arthur asked, staring at it. "A restraining order," Annie said. "And a bill for the forensic audit. Security will escort you out. You are not to return to your office to collect personal effects. We will box them and ship them to Well, wherever you're sleeping tonight." "Annie, wait! Get him out of my sight," Annie commanded, turning her back on him to address the board. "Now regarding the Q3 projections." The guards grabbed Arthur by the arms. It wasn't a gentle guide. It was a forceful removal. "Get your hands off me!" Arthur screamed as they dragged him backward through the double doors. "I am the vice president. I built this." They dragged him past Beatrice. She didn't look up. She just took a sip of her coffee. They dragged him past the glass-walled conference rooms where junior executives men, Arthur had mentored men. He had bullied, watched with open mouths. He saw smirks. He saw iPhones held up recording the downfall. The elevator ride down was silent, save for Arthur's ragged breathing. He tried to smooth his suit, tried to regain some dignity, but the guards held him tight. When the doors opened to the lobby, it was even more crowded than before. Word had spread. The king was dead. Officer Miller was waiting at the turnstiles. As the guards shoved Arthur through the exit, Miller stepped forward. He held a cardboard box. It was small. "Your things, Mr. Vance," Miller said, shoving the box into Arthur's chest. Arthur looked inside. It didn't contain his awards. It didn't contain his expensive fountain pens. It contained a half-empty bottle of mouthwash, a stress ball, and a framed photo of him and Annie from 10 years ago face down. "This is it," Arthur stammered. "Where is my Mont Blanc set? Where is my humidor? Company property," Miller said, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "Purchased with the corporate card. It stays." Arthur stumbled out through the revolving doors, spilled onto the hot pavement of the New York City sidewalk. The humidity hit him like a physical blow. He clutched the pathetic box to his chest. Passers-by walked around him, annoyed that he was blocking the flow of traffic. To them, he wasn't a fallen tycoon. He was just another guy in a suit having a bad day. He looked up at the tower one last time. High above on the 40th floor, he imagined Annie sitting in his chair, signing the papers that erased his legacy. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out with trembling fingers. It was a notification from his bank. Alert, checking account overdrawn. Recurring payment. Porsche Financial failed. Arthur Vance sank down onto the concrete planter outside the building he used to rule. He put his head in his hands and wept. Not for his marriage, not for his morals, but for the only thing he had ever truly loved himself. And for the first time in his life, he realized that nobody was watching, and nobody cared. 6 months later, the Federal Correctional Institution at Otisville was known in the press as a club fed for white-collar criminals. But from the inside, it was just a cage. The air always smelled the same, a mixture of industrial floor wax, boiled cabbage, and despair. Arthur Vance sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at the concrete wall. The man who had once spent $3,000 on a suit just because he liked the lining was now wearing a jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big and the color of dirty dishwater. His hair, once meticulously styled and dyed to hide the gray, was now thinning rapidly, revealing the stark white roots of a man who had aged 10 years in 6 months. "Vance!" Agar Harrold barked from the hallway. "Visitor! Move it!" Arthur stood up. A flicker of hope ignited in his chest. He checked his reflection in the polished metal that served as a mirror. He smoothed his eyebrows. It has to be Annie, he thought, as he was marched down the corridor. She's finally come. She's realized she can't run the company without me. She's here to offer a deal. I'll play hard to get it first, then I'll agree to consult. He walked into the visitation room, his heart pounding. He sat down at booth number 4 and looked through the thick, scratched plexiglass. The hope died instantly. Sitting on the other side wasn't Annie. It wasn't even Chloe, who had blocked his number and moved to Los Angeles the day the indictment came down. It was Ivan Sterling, Annie's lawyer. Ivan looked immaculate. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Arthur's bail bond. He had a leather briefcase open on the table next to him. Arthur picked up the black phone receiver. "What do you want?" he rasped. His voice sounded rusty. He didn't talk much these days. The other inmates didn't care about his stories of corporate conquests. "Just tying up loose ends, Arthur." Ivan said, his voice tinny and distorted through the speaker. "I'm here to close out the final distribution of the marital estate." Arthur leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "The estate, right. The penthouse sold last month. I saw it on the news in the rec room. Sold for $6.2 million. "It did," Ivan nodded. "So where's my half?" Arthur demanded, a spark of his old arrogance flaring up. "Even with the restitution to Vanguard, there has to be equity. I want my check, Ivan. I need to put money on my commissary account. The food in here is garbage." Ivan stared at him for a long moment. It was a look of profound professional pity. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper, a spreadsheet with lines of red ink. He pressed it against the glass. "You need to look at the math, Arthur." Arthur squinted at the numbers. "What is this?" "That is the reality of your life," Ivan explained calmly. "You assumed you were rich because you lived in a rich man's house and drove a rich man's car. But you didn't own any of it." Ivan pointed to the first line. "The penthouse was mortgaged to 90% of its value. After the bank took their cut and we paid the closing costs, the equity was minimal. Then came the liens. The restitution order for the embezzlement." Ivan ticked them off on his fingers. "The legal fees for your defense, which you never paid, so your lawyers placed a lien on the estate. The credit card debt, Arthur, you had $150,000 across 5 cards. You were financing a millionaire's lifestyle on Visa and MasterCard." Arthur felt a cold sweat breaking out on his neck. "But the Aston Martin, the boat." "Leased," Ivan said ruthlessly. "All of it. You owned nothing. You were renting an identity." Ivan pulled a check from his pocket. It was pale blue. He slid it through the small slot at the bottom of the partition. Arthur grabbed it. His hands were shaking. He looked at the amount. "Pay to the order of Arthur Vance. Amount $400.50. Arthur stared at the number. $400. It wouldn't even buy a bottle of the champagne he used to drink with lunch. "This is a joke," Arthur whispered, looking up with wild eyes. "You cooked the books. You and Annie stole my money. It's not a joke, Arthur. It's the balance. That is exactly what you are worth." Arthur crumpled the check in his fist. He wanted to scream, to throw the chair, but he knew the guards would tase him. He took a deep breath, trying to find an angle. Any angle. "How is she?" Arthur asked, changing tactics. He forced a sneer onto his face. "Is she miserable? Is the company tanking I give it another 6 months before the board comes out begging for me to save them?" Ivan chuckled. It wasn't a mean laugh which made it worse. It was a genuine amused sound. "Vanguard stock is up 18% since you left," Ivan said, delivering the news like a weather report. "Annie implemented a profit-sharing model that you always blocked. Productivity is through the roof. The employees actually like coming to work now." "She got lucky," Arthur muttered. "She's just a housewife." "She's the chairwoman of the board, Arthur, and she's good at it. But that's just her Tuesday." Ivan leaned in closer to the glass. "She's in Italy right now. Tuscany. She's renting a villa with her own money, not company funds. She's taking painting classes. She looks 10 years younger. Is she with anyone? Arthur asked. He hated himself for asking, but he had to know. He needed to know if he had been replaced. She's with herself, Arthur, Ivan said. And she's finally happy. She told me to tell you something if you asked. Arthur looked up. What did she say? That she misses me? Ivan shook his head. She said to tell you that she doesn't hate you. Hate takes energy, and she doesn't want to waste any more energy on you. She said she's grateful. Grateful, Arthur blinked. For what? For showing her exactly how strong she is, Ivan said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. She spent 15 years thinking she needed you to navigate the world. You proved that you were just the anchor holding her back. Ivan picked up his briefcase. Enjoy the $400, Arthur. Try not to spend it all in one place. Wait, Arthur shouted, slamming his hand against the glass. Ivan, wait. You can't leave me here. I have no one. My parents won't answer my calls. Chloe is gone. I'm all alone. Ivan didn't look back. He walked out of the room. The heavy steel door clanging shut behind him with a sound of finality that echoed in Arthur's bones. Arthur sat there in the silence. He looked down at the crumpled check in his hand. $412.50. For 15 years, he had boasted. He had strutted through the world, believing he was the smartest man in every room. He had told his mistress that he was going to replace his wife, leave her with nothing, and ascend to the throne he deserved. The irony tasted like ash in his mouth. He had succeeded in his plan in a way. He had left his wife. She was gone, and he was definitely starting a new life. He stood up slowly as the guard approached. "Time's up, Vance," the guard grunted. "Let's go." Arthur Vance, the man who thought he was a king, turned around and shuffled back toward his cell. He clutched the check to his chest, not because it was money, but because it was the only receipt he had left for a life spent chasing fool's gold. He had tried to play the big game, never realizing that the opponent he underestimated held all the cards from the very beginning. And that is the ultimate receipt. Arthur Vance spent his life thinking value was determined by price tags and appearances. He treated his wife like an accessory he could discard, never realizing she was the entire engine of his life. He wanted a trophy, but he lost the championship. This story serves as a brutal reminder. Be careful who you step on as you climb the ladder, because they might just own the building. Annie didn't need to scream or fight dirty to get her revenge. She just let Arthur's own arrogance destroy him piece by piece. What would you have done in Annie's shoes? Would you have let him rot in prison? Or was the $400 check the perfect insult? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of instant karma and a sweet justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story about liars getting exactly what they deserve. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.